All of a sudden, it looks like the World Cup has been blown open by the Rugby Championship. Now, are we overreacting to that? We'll get the New Zealand view from Gregor Paul in a couple of minutes' time. In the meantime, Cian Tracy, the Irish Independent here. Cian, how are you?
Good, Jerry. How are you?
Are we overreacting to a performance where the All Blacks, so if anybody didn't see this, they coughed up 49 points, was it? It was nearly 50 anyway.
Yeah.
And they had a man down for a good...
just before half time, Scott Barrett got sent off, so
yeah,
it had an effect. But at the same time, Australia were still on top, I think it has to be said. But in terms of an overreaction, I think it probably has confirmed what we've thought for the last couple of years, that the gap has narrowed. In saying that, I would still massively expect a backlash from New Zealand this weekend, and it's not like New Zealand aren't going to be contenders come Japan, but I think the chasing pack have cut the gap and New Zealand have sort of stepped back a bit. I don't think there's any doubt that they're not as good as they were 4 years ago, which I suppose makes it an more open World Cup, like Liam was saying there, and gives everyone else hope, I guess.
Were you a little bit terrified by watching both games last Saturday in terms of what's actually going on down in the Southern Hemisphere? Like, some of the rugby played in both of those encounters was unbelievable.
Well, yeah, like when you watch the New Zealand game in the morning and then you go to the Aviva later that afternoon, now it's like comparing apples and oranges. Second string team in a warm-up game, but
sure.
Yeah, like in terms of the intensity and the physicality that was played at, it looked like a different sport. But at the same time, Ireland are only at the start of their season. They've still got a long way to go. Like Ger said, the red card did have an effect. I even see there overnight Scott Barrett has been suspended for 3 weeks, which is it's probably about right, but it's convenient enough as well, because you know the way the rugby works, where you get a 3-week ban, but it has to count for games, and his games will actually count in the Mitre 10 Cup. Now the question is, would he have played in the Mitre 10 Cup? It allows him to be back for the opening game of the World Cup against South Africa, which is probably just as well, because with Brodie Retallick a doubt as well, if they had been down 2 locks, then you know you're going to see that gap cut even further. So there are a lot of question marks. I think it'll be interesting to get Gregor's sort of take on it. The out half situation is very interesting, I think. While Richie Mwanga has 100% earned his shot, you know, he was outstanding for the Crusaders last season. I don't think it's really worked so far with moving Beauden Barrett back to full back. You could see it last week, Beauden Barrett stepping into first receiver. He is the main playmaker. When he's not getting the ball, you can see that he's getting frustrated. So I think the team selection will be a bit telling this weekend to see which way Steve Hansen goes with that.
Okay, we've got Gregor Paul. We can go to New Zealand now and talk to Gregor. Good morning to you, Gregor. Good afternoon, good evening to you, where you are. We had you on recently enough before the Rugby Championship, and you were saying don't be surprised if actually New Zealand do lose some games. Is this part of a broader plan to try and bed in new systems, new plans, or is it an old rope-a-dope tactic to try and make the rest of the world forget about how great New Zealand are?
Well, I don't think it was a plan to lose by nearly 50 points on the weekend, clearly. Look, it's still, I mean, when we spoke last time, there was a sense that the All Blacks are rebuilding and mixing things up in terms of how they want to play the game, and they've also had to mix up their selections the way that most teams are at the moment as they try and work out, you know, who they want to take to Japan, all that kind of stuff. Having said that, Saturday night in Perth was meant to be the moment where the All Blacks put a performance together, and there were, you know, the Bledisloe Cup is very important to them, and they made it very clear that they were there in Perth to win, and maybe with the exception of Retallick and Sonny Bill Williams, that's their best team that they put on the park. And it didn't go particularly well for them. So the views changed a wee bit. And I mean, it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, you wouldn't be nuts enough to go and sort of write off the All Blacks and imagine that they've lost one game, therefore it's all curtains for them. I don't think that would be a sort of sensible conclusion to reach. But there is now an element of pressure on this team, the way that there wasn't 2 weeks ago, because they haven't played well for some time now. And they've been rebuilding for too long. There haven't been enough signs that they're on the right track. I mean, there's little flashes here and there, but there's been nothing consistent or nothing impressive and nothing overwhelming. But look, it's the All Blacks, and you never know with these guys. They go to Eden Park on Saturday night and everything might click for them, and you could bring me back next week and I could tell you, look, this team is you know, miles ahead of everyone else and is going to win the World Cup. So it can change very quickly.
Even if they do put in a great performance next week, though, one thing that the rest of the rugby world, and it seems in particular South Africa, will have seen is that they're not unbeatable. That suddenly the aura that the team 4 years ago and the team 8 years ago had isn't quite there about this group of players, that those teams were all-time great teams. This team is just a good New Zealand team, and by definition are therefore far more beatable than those previous two?
Well, to an extent I'd agree, but I'd also say I don't think that any All Black team has ever been unbeatable. And, Ireland have proven that, and plenty of other teams. The McCaw team, they lost enough games to not feel that they were invincible. By the time they got to the World Cup, they were in. They performed particularly well at that 2015 World Cup, and they were probably head and shoulders the best team there. Will it be like that this time round? No, I don't think so. But the current team don't have the depth of experience or the depth of quality that 2015 team did. They've also got a couple of genuine question marks over a couple of areas on the field. Their loose trio and their midfield in particular. When you look at the 2011 team and the 15 team, both of them had Jerome Kano, Richie McCaw, Kieran Reid, one of the great back rows of all time, and then Martin Onu and Conrad Smith in the midfield for both tournaments. So, that made a phenomenal difference, and they've struggled a wee bit, I would say, to have replaced those combinations. They've got a lot of good players, but they haven't built a combination in either the loose trio or the midfield, and that probably above all else is where they look to me to be missing their flow and their rhythm. They haven't built it because they haven't had any consistency or quality, or enough quality, from those two critical areas on the field.
Yeah. Are you confident enough, though, that there's enough time for a new midfield partnership to emerge, and for the back row trio for a back row trio to assert themselves as clear starters, and so therefore be able to build up that sort of cohesiveness that look, you're talking about all-time great centre partnership, all-time great back row, so whatever happens, probably not going to be quite as good as that. Notwithstanding that, there is enough time between now and that game in September against the Springboks for the All Blacks to work that out, is there?
Oh, look, I think so. But it'll be a bit ad hoc. I think they're going to end up playing the loose trio that they started with in Perth, for the simple reason that Artie Savia is just playing so well that you can't keep him off the park. Ditto Sam Cane, and they're not going to move Kieran Reid out of the team. So that's the loose trio. Look, amid all the doom and gloom, there were still some signs in Perth. And you've got to remember there was a red card here, so some of it goes out the window a little bit in trying to make serious analysis, because you got 14 v 15. So you got to be a wee bit wary of that. But there were signs in the first 20 minutes while the All Blacks tight five, and we'll come back to them because they are a bit of a problem at the moment. Their loose trio, playing three guys like that, having two open sides on the field, they were attacking the breakdown. Every breakdown they had a man going in for the ball, and they made Australia's life difficult there, with the intensity with which they made Australia have to recycle, and they slowed their ball down brilliantly. You'd imagine if they can get their tight five revved up a little bit, keep 15 players on the park, that will probably work quite well for them. So I think that's one element that that they'll stick with, and I think with Savia on the park, you've got this ability to play fast, open rugby. He's a brilliant ball carrier. He's a brilliant ball player. I mean, you can shove him on the wing, as he'd cropped up plenty of times. Look, I think they've got enough there in that loose trio to think that that's what they'll go with.
Gregor, we just had an image up on screen there a moment ago of Scott Barrett's red card incident. I think you were saying that it was the least deserved red card in history.
Well, I actually just remembered when you rang that I think Jamie Heaslip probably took that award. I forgot about him. He was red carded out here I think he kneeled gently on Richie McCaw's head, but of course it was McCaw's head that he leaned on, so that was the end of him. But look, it wasn't. Everyone will have different views about it, and I thought it was interesting that Eddie Jones made a point of saying he thought it was ridiculous. Michael Cheika was actually quite generous and said, look, I've got quite a lot of sympathy for the bloke, and I think there's a genuine worry here. You remove all nationalities and allegiance to one side. We've got to be a little bit careful come the World Cup that things happen. We've got to make a real distinction between clear and obvious foul play, where there's either reckless intent or a genuine desire to take someone's head off. Players have got to be protected from that. I'm dubious as to whether that was what happened in that particular collision. Look, his technique was a bit, I don't know, it was a bit clumsy. He led with his shoulder. It was dumb, but I don't really think it was a collision full of intent. I think we've got to be careful that guys don't get red carded at the World Cup. And I think every coach in the game is probably looking at that going, "God, that could be us." You know, you don't want to be going in a quarter-final and have a guy sent off 20 minutes after the game because he accidentally hit someone's head with no real intent. So I think that's what we've got to all be a little bit wary about.
There has been a view in the past, Gregor, that New Zealand have an ability to get away with a little bit more than any other team in World Rugby. Is that ability waning a little bit?
I think there's no doubt in the past, and I think particularly at the end of McCaw's reign, he was so good, wasn't he, at just sort of persuading referees that he never did anything wrong, and that no one in his team ever did anything wrong. And there's no doubt that referees were a little bit in awe of him and wary about penalising the All Blacks. I think that's probably fair enough. I don't think Kieran Reid has that same relationship or that same awe or aura about him. But I think it's also a little bit blown out of proportion as well. I mean, I don't think the All Blacks have never been penalised or they've got away with any more team. I think quite often it depends on, you know, which set of eyes you're watching a game through and what you want to happen to believe that that's actually the case.
Gregor, last question for you. If I give you a massive pile of chips, would you push them all in on New Zealand at the moment to win the World Cup?
No, I don't think I'd put them all in. It's still whatever else. I don't actually think that they were ever clear-cut favourites because I've never seen it that way. It's a World Cup. You know, there's really good teams out there. By the way, Australia didn't surprise me at all. They're a good team, and they'll get even better towards the World Cup. So they've always been a contender. South Africa have been a contender for the last year now. I still think Ireland are good enough to win the World Cup. England clearly could win it. Wales can win it. So I wouldn't put my money on the All Blacks, but I would still I wouldn't put all of it on. But if you name all those teams, probably by default, I would say I would still see them as slight favourites, but probably nowhere near the overwhelming favourites that they were for the last World Cup.
Good stuff, Gregor. Great to talk to you again. Thanks a million, man.
Thank you. Cheers.
Gregor Paul joining us from New Zealand there.